In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Imagine a world where every word spoken is absolute, where no promise is broken, and where gestures don't hide ulterior motives. A world where truth is the foundation of every interaction, and lies have no space to hide in the shadows. It may seem like a distant dream, perhaps even a utopia, or maybe a silent threat, because from the dawn of humanity, in the earliest stories told around the fire, lies have been present, but not as a mere moral mistake, rather as a device, a tool, a mask, even a mirror that reflects our insecurities and deepest desires. Lies disguise themselves in so many ways. In the whisper of a friend who softens a painful truth, in the glance of someone avoiding confrontation, in the speech of a leader who manipulates crowds with carefully chosen words. It is not an exception, it is the rule. And still, we're shocked when we're deceived, as if lying were a rare accident, a detour from the path, something that shouldn't happen. We pretend not to see that we are all, to a greater or lesser degree, dancing this disguised dance between what is real and what is illusory. In this video, we'll explore the many faces of lies. We'll peel back layer by layer, culture, psychology, language, and history, to understand why we lie, and, more importantly, what it reveals about ourselves. Instead of looking for blame, our goal is to reflect on what happens to society and the individual when lies become invisible because of their omnipresence. Get ready for a journey that spans ancient myths, modern research, and timeless dilemmas, because in the end, perhaps the greatest revelation is that understanding the true nature of a lie is the first step to a more truthful life. Lies don't arrive shouting. They don't wear the face of a villain. They often dress in kindness or perhaps convenience. They're always around, one way or another. They don't live on the margins of society, but are woven into its most intimate fabric, like a constant presence. From childhood, we learn to live with them. When a child cries and hears from their parents, it's just a noise, nothing happened. The lie sneaks into the simplest act. When a teenager, afraid of rejection, hides their truths to fit in with the group, the lie disguises itself as protection. And over the course of our lives, we learn that lying may be necessary, may be strategic, even civilized, but there's always a price to pay. In the most intimate spheres, lies weaken human bonds. They silently undermine trust until everything around us becomes suspicious. A relationship that seemed solid can be undone in a single moment of revelation. But the weight of the lie isn't just in the words spoken. The real damage is in the invisible erosion it causes, the doubt that eats away endlessly, the constant need for vigilance, the deep fear of showing vulnerability. In the public spheres, the lie takes on a new face, one that is more polished, more calculated, more institutional. It disguises itself as political discourse, empty promises, intentions that never come to fruition. But regardless of the form it takes, the lie becomes an integral part of our existence. It mixes with the everyday, with our relationships, with the story we tell about ourselves. And no matter how hard we try to ignore it, It's there, always present, affecting our decisions, our beliefs, and even our perception of who we are. What happens when we begin to realize that lies are more than just a moral mistake, but an invisible force that shapes our entire reality? How do we free ourselves from this silent prison we have built over time? Is it possible to find truth in a world where lies seem to be the norm? Stay with us as we unravel this complex web of deception, and perhaps together we can begin to walk toward a purer, more essential truth. Politicians distort data, corporations hide flaws, media outlets select convenient truths, and the population often accepts it all. Not out of ignorance, but out of exhaustion. Modern lies are no longer just an individual issue. They are collective, systemic. As Nietzsche observed, convictions are more dangerous enemies of the truth than lies. In other words, when a lie is repeated enough, when it is cloaked in conviction, it ceases to be seen as such. It transforms into ideology, into culture, and perhaps the most disturbing aspect is this: lies thrive because they serve deep desires rooted in our collective psyche, the desire for acceptance, for protection, for control. In an unstable world, truth can seem too brutal, and then the lie emerges as a thin blanket, insufficient, but better than the cold reality. We are surrounded by it. But what makes it so irresistible, even knowing it's there, is the fact that, consciously or not, we continue to use it and fall into it. To understand this, we need to go beyond visible behavior and dive into the collective unconscious. We need to journey into the stories humanity has told about itself and recognize that in the oldest myths, an uncomfortable truth was already hidden. The lie is not just a mistake. It is an archetype. Long before courts, ethical manuals, or lie detectors, humanity already knew the power of falsehood and dramatized it in myths. Among gods, talking animals, and tragic heroes, one recurring character stands out: the trickster. This archetype reveals that, while lies are feared, they are also revered. Loki, in Norse mythology, is both playful and dangerous. Hermes, in ancient Greece, was the god of thieves and communication, a messenger who knew that words could both reveal and deceive. And in Brazilian folklore, Saci Pererê is one of our most emblematic tricksters. With one leg, a magical hat, and a pipe in his mouth, he confuses travelers, hides objects, plays tricks, but also guards the secrets of the forest. The Curupira, with feet turned backward and flaming hair, deceives hunters and alters trails, confusing those who threaten the natural balance. These figures aren't villains in the classic sense. They embody creative intelligence, the subversion of rules, the ability to shift the game when all seems lost. The trickster lives at the edge of norms, and it's precisely for this reason that he reveals just how fragile those norms really are. Jung saw the trickster as a manifestation of the collective unconscious, a reflection of the human shadow, those parts of ourselves that we repress but that never truly disappear. The trickster is a personification of the unconscious aspect of the psyche, amoral, irreverent, yet full of vitality and creativity. He represents impulses that don't quite fit within the social order, but that paradoxically are responsible for keeping that very order alive and in motion. The trickster, with his ability to bend the rules, forces us to question whether those rules are truly as solid as we believe. He makes us reflect on truth and lies not as opposites, but as complementary forces, weaving together to shape our world, often in ways we don't even realize. And this is where the lie, contrary to popular belief, doesn't stand against the truth. It is so entwined with it that at times it becomes nearly impossible to tell one from the other. What lies teach us, more than anything else, is that our perception of reality is far more fluid and complex than we'd like to admit. There is deep wisdom hidden within myths. Though lies can be destructive, they can also be revealing. They have the power to humble the proud, to free the oppressed, and to destabilize unjust systems. The trickster deceives, but in doing so, he reveals. He forces kings off their thrones, exposes the arrogance of certainty, and reminds us that behind every absolute truth may lie an unquestioned illusion. That's why these mythological characters have stood the test of time. They represent something that never disappears, the ambivalent nature of the lie. It can protect or manipulate, liberate or imprison. And understanding this ambiguity is essential because in truth, it lives within us. So when we examine our own lies, big or small, the question that arises is, are we simply being dishonest, or are we trying to survive? To answer that, we need to dive deeper. We need to understand why we lie. From a psychological perspective, lying is not just an action. It's often a defense, a response, sometimes unconscious, to pain, fear, or shame. So, to understand lying is also to understand human suffering. Psychology shows us that lying stems from a variety of motivations. In many cases, it's a way to protect our self-image. The student who tells a teacher he was sick when in fact he procrastinated. The employee who exaggerates performance to keep a job. In these situations, the lie acts as a shield. It prevents the individual from facing failure or from facing the judgment they fear from others. Other lies are born out of empathy, like the son who doesn't tell his mother he's going through a rough time just so she won't worry, or the friend who says, "You look great," even though she knows the other is emotionally falling apart. These may seem like acts of care, but they're also acts of control. Because when we lie out of empathy, we're not just protecting the other person, we're deciding, on our own, what they can or can't handle. Then there's the kind of lie that becomes a habit. People who lie frequently, even without a clear reason, may be dealing with old traumas, chronic insecurity, or even personality disorders. For them, the truth feels too dangerous, like an unbearable exposure. And then, finally, there's the seductive lie, the thrill of manipulation, the satisfaction of control, the twisted pleasure in watching others believe a carefully crafted illusion in its most extreme form. This shows up as pathological lying, where the distortion of reality isn't driven by need, but by compulsion. This is the realm of the deepest shadow, where lying becomes part of one's identity. What all these forms of deception reveal is that, more often than not, Lying is an attempt to avoid pain, but as psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott once said, it's only when someone is real that they can truly live. In other words, lies may protect, but they never heal. They postpone the confrontation, they bring momentary relief, but they deepen the wound. And perhaps the most dangerous part of all this is this: the more we lie to others, the easier it becomes to lie to ourselves. And when that happens, the truth doesn't disappear. It just hides in a dark corner of the soul, waiting for the right moment to resurface as anxiety, guilt, or breakdown. Maybe the most subtle and most devastating form of lying isn't the one we tell others, but the one we whisper to the mirror. Self-deception is a clever art. It doesn't lie outright. It reshapes memory, distorts facts, rationalizes choices. It convinces you that what you want is what you deserve, that what you fear isn't that serious, and that what hurts can simply be ignored. But self-deception isn't simply hypocrisy. It serves a deeper psychological function: to preserve the integrity of the ego, to avoid the collapse of the image we've built of ourselves. A man unhappy in his marriage might tell himself, it's just a phase. A woman overwhelmed by life might insist, I can handle everything. A professional in crisis might repeat, this is normal, everyone goes through this. These phrases, said once in a while, are attempts to keep ourselves going, but when repeated too often, they become inner walls, blocking us from seeing what truly needs to change. Nietzsche once said, conviction is a prison. It prevents us from seeing, from hearing, from learning. And that's what self-deception does. It traps us. It offers peace at the cost of clarity. Because facing the truth takes courage. It requires us to admit that we've made mistakes, that we're not as noble, as strong, or as right as we'd like to believe. In therapy, patients rarely begin by saying, I lie to myself. They arrive with symptoms: anxiety, burnout, unexplained anger, a loss of meaning, and little by little, it becomes clear. The symptom is the unconscious speaking. It's the body saying what the mind refuses to hear. The great tragedy of self-deception isn't just that it separates us from reality, it separates us from ourselves. And when that happens, the consequences run deep. In the end, lies don't free us from pain. They just delay it until it returns in an even more painful form. We lose touch with our most intimate truth, our desires, our fears, our real limitations. But there is hope, because when we finally face reality, when we're able to say to ourselves, this life I'm living isn't true, something begins to shift. The inner truth may hurt, but it's liberating. From that point on, we can begin to rebuild our lives with greater authenticity. While individual lies can hurt, systemic lies have the power to destroy everything. Throughout history, empires have fallen, economies have collapsed, and entire populations have suffered because of illusions spread by leaders, institutions, or ideologies. When lies become part of the machinery of power, they don't just distort reality, they redefine it. Governments have promised peace while preparing for war. Corporations have hidden data that could have saved lives. Political movements have twisted the truth in the name of greater causes. And perhaps most unsettling of all, these lies weren't upheld solely by ignorance, but by millions of people who, at some level, chose to believe them. Politics is full of examples: unrealistic promises, manipulated statistics, truths conveniently left out. In times of crisis, lies become a tool for management, a way to maintain order, protect reputation, preserve the system. But that control comes at a cost. Once public trust is broken, it's nearly impossible to restore. Institutions lose legitimacy, people plunge into cynicism, and collective disillusionment sets in. Everyone lies, they say, not as a protest, but as resignation. George Orwell captured this brilliantly in 1984 when he wrote, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears." It was their final, most essential command. In a world where truth is malleable, whoever controls the narrative controls reality. And here lies the tragedy. Systemic lies persist because many people prefer the stability they offer over the chaos that truth might bring. The employee who stays silent about a boss's mistake, the scientist who avoids publishing inconvenient data, the citizen who turns a blind eye to injustice because acknowledging it threatens their comfort. Small acts of compliance build vast structures of illusion. But for how long? History shows us that systems built on falsehood tend to collapse, not because of moral awakening, but because reality eventually demands its due. Lies require constant upkeep, and when the tension between what is lived and what is claimed becomes unbearable, something breaks. So, what can sustain us in the face of the ethical and psychological collapse that structural dishonesty brings? The answer is to cultivate a different way of being, a life grounded in honest practices, in authentic dialogue, in a commitment to what is real, even when that reality is uncomfortable. To live honestly in a world where lying has become the norm is a radical act of resistance. But how do we make truth not just an ideal, but a daily practice? How do we nurture it when it demands courage, vulnerability, and sometimes sacrifice? Honesty is not the same as brutality, nor is it a rigid stance. It requires discernment and skill. Being honest is, above all, an inner presence, a commitment to one's own conscience before any social obligation. Practically speaking, this begins with self-observation. When do we lie the most? To whom? In what situations? Maybe we lie at work to preserve our image, or to friends to avoid conflict. Maybe to family, out of fear of disappointing them. Recognizing these patterns is the first step toward transforming them. The next step is practicing honest but compassionate communication. There is an art to speaking difficult truths with tenderness, to setting boundaries without aggression, to owning our mistakes without falling apart. This can be practiced in therapy, in conscious dialogue circles, in private journaling, because the more natural the language of truth becomes, the less we'll resort to the improvisation of lies. Another dimension of this practice involves creating collective environments that value truth. In education, for example, This means teaching young people not only not to lie, but also to think critically, to recognize fake news, to argue with integrity. In companies, it means rewarding transparency, not just results. In institutions, it means ensuring safe channels for whistleblowing and sincere listening. When lies are accepted as normal, they weaken the very foundation of our personal and social relationships. But truth, when cultivated with courage and commitment, has the power to set us free, to restore trust, and to build a more authentic and integral society. The practice of honesty is, therefore, a demanding path, but an essential one for both individual and collective regeneration. In the deepest spiritual traditions, telling the truth goes beyond a simple ethical principle. It is a path to freedom. In various Buddhist schools, for instance, there's a central precept: speak only what is true, helpful, and kind. In Christianity, Jesus says, "The truth will set you free." But that is not an easy promise. It is a demanding call, because the truth does set us free, yes. But first, it confronts us. It strips us of our masks, our justifications, our comforting illusions. It reveals who we are and who we are not, and that, though frightening, is deeply healing. The practice of honesty is not perfect. There will be days when we lie, consciously or not. But what defines the honest path is the willingness to return, to make amends, to not turn a misstep into a pattern in times of post-truth, fake news, and algorithms that feed our biases. Telling the truth, even if partial, even if fragmented, is a political act, a spiritual stand, and a profoundly human gesture. And so, we arrive at the fundamental question: is it possible to live authentically in a world of masks? The art of honesty being truthful today is like walking against silent current. With every step, the inner voice whispers, "Be strategic. Don't reveal too much. Truth doesn't pay off." We are surrounded by filters, not just on social media, but in our relationships, our conversations, our everyday gestures. Everyone, to some degree, wears a mask, and it's no coincidence that society rewards performance, image control, and conformity. To show yourself fully feels dangerous. It can be judged as weakness. It can be exploited. It might not be understood. But the price of living hidden is steep. The soul knows when it is living in dissonance. It feels the exhaustion of maintaining appearances, the emptiness of relationships based on edited versions of the self, the anxiety of not knowing who we truly are, because each day we perform a role. Living authentically doesn't mean being brutally honest all the time, or recklessly exposing our truths at any cost. It means, first and foremost, being aligned between what we, and so, as we look at the world around us, full of masks and illusions, true courage is not in avoiding the truth, but in embracing it. Living with authenticity is an act of resistance, a daily choice to be who we truly are, without hiding the pain, the fear, or the imperfections that make us human. It's not about perfection, but about inner alignment, about recognizing that despite the stumbles, the path of truth will always be the most liberating one. So the question is no longer, Just can we be truthful in a world of masks? But is it worth it to be truthful? Is it worth facing vulnerability and uncertainty to live in alignment with what our soul truly longs for? The answer, as we know, is not simple, but it is in that raw place of honesty that we find real freedom. And in the end, remember, lies may be seductive. They may offer temporary refuge, but they will never bring lasting peace. Only truth, with all its weight and beauty, has the power to transform us from the inside out. So, embrace your truth, and in doing so, allow the world around you to be transformed as well. May your journey toward authenticity be filled with courage, with clarity, and above all, with the kind of freedom that only truth can offer.